content data engineering and analytics at Netflix. What his team does is enable better decisions about what content to invest in and how to efficiently get that original content from script to screen. He'll give a talk entitled Data Engineering at the Interface of Art and Science. There it is. Please join me in welcoming Josh.
Good. Hey everybody, can you hear me okay without holding the mic? No? That's good. Is this better? Is this? Okay, cool. Louder! Even louder? I have to be like a singer and hold it in my mouth? Okay, so yeah, let me know. Maybe just give me hand signals if I'm not paying attention to where the mic is. Well, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to try and cover two high-level things here, and I'm basing this off of questions I find myself often getting asked doing work in data engineering and analytics here in Hollywood, where people sometimes don't even know that we're here, and they want to learn a little bit more about what Netflix is doing in Hollywood, and then also, people have maybe read our culture deck and have questions about the style of work that we do, how it might be different. So I thought I'd touch on those two topics. So let's dive into Netflix in Hollywood. So I'm part of the data engineering and analytics org. There's a few of my colleagues here in the audience too, if you have a chance to talk to us at our booth. And we're part of a team that really engineers data and insights that support decision making across the company. Netflix is a very data-oriented company. It has been from the start, and we serve a kind of foundational layer in that culture. So we manage this 60-plus petabyte cloud-based data warehouse, and we're comprised of data engineers, visualization engineers, and quants. Now, most of this work happens up in the headquarters in Los Gatos in the Bay Area, but an increasing amount of this work happens down here in Hollywood. So this is our office. It's the big, tall, white building here with the LA skyline in the background. And there's about over 1,000 people here already. So how many people didn't even know Netflix was here, much less we had this big office? Yeah, so it's pretty telling. Very few people know that we're here, but yeah, we do have this big presence. This is on an actual studio set. It used to be known as the Bronson Studio site. There's 3 stages here where there's filming of some of our content going on probably right now. And there's a historic aspect to this too, which is this is what it looked like back in the 1920s. This was when it was with Warner Brothers, and it's the location of the first filming of a talking movie called The Jazz Singer back in 1927. So super fun place to be, this kind of mix of emerging tech, but also this great history. Okay, so how are we organized? I get this question a lot of times, and this isn't an exact org chart, but like many companies, you have some high-level leaders that work in the kind of functional areas. I'm leaving some things out, but for this topic, these are these high-level orgs to consider. And what's important at Netflix is that while we are the engineering teams are under this product org, we don't have these rigid alignments and rigid KPIs and budgets. Instead, we really try to organize functionally with this idea of bounded contexts. And so, even though we're part of the product organization, there's different sub-teams within data engineering and analytics that align with different parts of the business. And our job in those settings is to really understand the context of that space. And by doing this, we try to keep from kind of fighting context and fighting prioritization across contexts, and instead focus on deep understanding within them. And across that work, you can see we do a mix of analytics, metric development, data pipelines, and data engineering. Now later today, one of my colleagues is going to talk about the actual data platform. So if you want to learn more about the innards of some of the data pipelines, the tools we use, etc., go to that talk at 4:30. I'm going to stay a little bit higher level. Okay, so this type of alignment really gets at this cultural thing that you may have heard. Netflix is really big in this idea of highly aligned, loosely coupled. And this happens not only for us, but some of our sister teams like the science and algorithms group. So to add a little bit of color on this, science and algorithms is one of the teams that we work with especially closely. This is a team, a lot of them have PhDs in computational science fields. They tend to work on, large-scale, kind of long time horizon in terms of investment, statistical inference, machine learning, those things, and they're trying to embed those insights into big operational processes, so kind of acting on process at scale. The data engineering and analytics team also does analytics work, but ours tends to be more in the vein of metric development, ad hoc analyses, and exploratory work. So in broad strokes, science and algorithms is doing work that you're looking at machine-to-machine decision-making, and data engineering and analytics tends to work on decisions that are maybe made less frequently, and they're made by people. But the reality is we work together very closely on a lot of things. And the big point here is that this idea of highly aligned, loosely coupled. In terms of location, I've highlighted in red here, this is the part that's in Hollywood. So again, most of these teams, whether it's science and algorithms or data engineering and analytics, is up in Los Gatos, but there's an increasing amount here in Hollywood. Really all of the content spaces and part of the marketing space. Okay, so content DEA specifically. We're really focused on building data and insights over 3 dimensions. One is we want to invest in the best content at the right price. And it doesn't matter whether it's a licensed content that's maybe already been out for a while, like World War Z, or a Netflix original like Orange is the New Black. It's important to clarify that we don't use analytics and data to pick content or to algorithmically change the storyline for a show. We don't do that. We rely on great judgment from a lot of experts, and the job of teams like mine are to give them a foundation, a set of context to better inform those decisions. So across all these things, it really is the combination of great data, but also great human judgment and expertise. The second area is building growing global audiences as we expand to more and more countries. And this is not only in terms of localizing our user interface and localizing some of our shows by adding subtitling and audio dubbing. It's also trying to find global audiences for local stories. And that's a really important part of how we try to bring subscriber joy. And then third is efficiently moving from script to screen. Netflix has been a tech company for a long time, but we're becoming a studio as well. And so across what is often a multi-year process, we want to instrument that, digitize it, and learn and make our content delivery process more and more efficient so that we're putting more and more money onto the screen. And across these 3 dimensions, the big picture is what we're really trying to do is maximize subscriber joy. And we do that through the lens of content. Other teams are working through the lens of making a better and better product experience, or easier and easier payment systems, etc. Our lens is the one of content, which is why we're here in Hollywood. Okay, so some of the teams that we partner with here at Netflix, it's a pretty diverse group of upstream engineering teams, downstream engineering teams, platform groups, various people involved in the creative side of things, and this diverse set of stakeholders we work with closely is challenging but really fun. And this is what it means to be at the interface of art and tech, is that we're working across these boundaries, trying to understand what people in the Hollywood creative industry need, what script writers and people who evaluate content are doing, but also the massive scale that Netflix works at from a tech and data perspective. Okay, so a little bit about our toolbox. It's a pretty diverse mix of things. I imagine a lot of people in the audience are using some of this very same tech stack. It's a mix of well-known open source tools, but also years of investment in Netflix's own kind of ecosystem of open source tools. Maybe people here have used things like Genie or other all these things. And I thought I'd add this just so you can kind of see, but what I want to do is actually segue to more of the kind of style or how we do our work and not as much about the tech. So, what exactly is different about working in data engineering at Netflix? I think every company's got its unique setting, its culture, things that make the work challenging. I'm certainly not going to try and cover that expansively here, but when I talk to people about what we do, I find a few themes coming out over and over again when people are interested in more about the work. And again, not just the tech, but the kind of style. So, number one is scale, but it's not what you might think when we talk about scale. So let's just ground ourselves in a few numbers. We're over 100 million subscribers. We've now crossed the threshold of having more international subscribers than domestic. It's a big milestone. We're in 190 countries and 25 languages. And to be clear, those 25 languages are just where we've localized the user interface. We have more languages when it comes to subtitling and audio dubbing, and these are growing all the time. So an increasingly global presence. More than 1,500 supported devices, every kind of phone, smart TV, tablet, etc. 125 million hours of viewing a day, about 45 billion hours of viewing a year. I'm sure some of you have heard these kind of insane stats about the percentage of internet traffic that is accounted for by Netflix. It's pretty high. And then, just in terms of monetary, we're spending $6 billion on content. So these are big numbers, right? Lots of stuff happening across the spectrum here. And what that means is, on Netflix's side, is that we're ingesting more than 700 billion events per day. A lot of that goes into this 60 plus and growing petabyte data warehouse. As a team, as a data engineering team, we're reading multiple petabytes from that a day, and we're writing hundreds of terabytes back in terms of updates, new drive metrics, etc. And it's important to call out that that data warehouse represents hundreds of core tables that are the foundation for lots of decision making across Netflix. Thousands of other tables that people are just using in ad hoc, exploratory research, etc. And then thousands of complex processing DAGs. All this stuff has to run across this highly distributed, large-scale environment. And this doesn't include anything that has to do with data persistence and data movement for the live service. That's completely separate topics that we have a tech blog about, that we also have great talks about. This is just the underpinnings of what we use for insights in helping inform decisions across the company. Okay, so there's a crazy amount of data work happening there, but luckily Netflix has been invested in this space really from the beginning. Some of you might not know that our CEO, Reed Hastings, actually his academic background is in artificial intelligence, and so we've been fortunate from the start that there's always been that mindset since 1997, if not before. How many people here competed in the Netflix prize, or at least are aware of it? Okay, so a lot of people. Before there was Kaggle, 11 years ago, Netflix was investing a lot of public money as well as internal resources in using machine learning to make better decisions at scale. And so along the way, there's tremendous ecosystem and maturity of internal tools and productivity. We also have the Netflix open source environment. Again, some of you are probably familiar with some of these tools. We use these things internally and then contribute to lots of open source projects. And so what it means is there's a lot of maturity in the space, a lot of investment in developer productivity, and we lean towards investing in those types of things because we want to maximize iteration speed and innovation speed as opposed to minimizing costs. And as you evaluate your own environment, I think that's always something to consider. Sometimes that's important to minimize costs, but sometimes you're trying to maximize innovation speed, and you make investments differently depending on how you're oriented. Netflix has kind of maintained this consistent drive for innovation speed throughout its 20-year history. Okay, so it's challenging when it comes to building a team of data engineers at Netflix, because across the scope of the work that a data engineer might do, some of it's way over on the systems engineering side, maybe traditional software development, and some of it might be way over towards traditional data warehousing. And having experience in all these things is great. If you're working for a startup, you might have to have some experience across this whole scope of things because you have to wear a lot of different hats. At a place like Netflix, though, we have an entire team of really talented people who can take care of part of that spectrum and that we can rely on. Again, it doesn't mean we don't have to know about those things or we don't have to dip our toes into those waters, but it's not part of our core job. What is important, though, is that at some end of that spectrum, you've got deep expertise. And I've given a little visualization to kind of facilitate how we might think about this. We don't literally draw this out when we talk to candidates, but it's just helpful to think about. You might find someone that has a really strong background in software engineering. They've worked with large-scale, distributed, batch-oriented ETL and data, but maybe they're kind of weak on just traditional SQL, Kimball data modeling, third normal form type data warehousing concepts. Those are also important. And we might find someone that's oriented differently, who's got great traditional data warehousing concepts, but perhaps hasn't used some of the tech stack that's part of distributed data processing. So what we're really looking for is, because Netflix has such investment in data, we can rely on great colleagues all around us to give us support. And what that really means for us then is, it's a little bit of just nomenclature, but I like to think about it as not so much data engineering as it is engineering data. Those 700 billion raw events, very little of that is actually very useful. It can be useful for automated alerting and kind of system performance for the live service, but to get insights out of it, none of that is probably that useful. You have to engineer data in order for people to build abstractions upon, build metrics upon, summarize, etc. And so it's that focus of engineering data that I think is a little nuanced for work at Netflix. Okay, number 2. That's a good segue into shared abstractions, because a lot of what we're doing with engineering data is trying to engineer shared abstractions across a large company. How many people have watched Ultimate Beastmaster? There's a few of you, more people watching. So it's a really good reality show. It's a reality competition show. It just launched this past spring. And what's interesting about it is how it was filmed behind the scenes. So what Netflix did is they essentially simultaneously filmed 6 versions of the show all at once, each one tailored to a different part of the world. So right now, this past season, there were competitors from 6 different countries. There were commentators live commentating for the audiences in their country, talking about some of these celebrities who were competing in this. But you've got essentially 6 different shows being filmed at the exact same time. Okay, so behind the scenes, there's really complex legal deal structures. There's complex asset setup with, is this one show that's edited 6 times? Is it 6 different shows? All the different metadata that we're managing behind the scenes. And in some sense, what we have to do in data engineering and analytics is abstract that complexity away so that we have logical notions of a title, we have logical notions of a show, and that we can continue to kind of provide insights and let our colleagues know how a global audience is engaging with this content without having to know the messiness of how it was actually created, the digital assets, the legal structures, etc. And this is true not only for just creating like a logical notion of a title, it goes into other metrics as well. So this second difference is we really prioritize shared abstractions over micro-optimizing any particular process or micro-optimizing a statistic. So we could add some nuance to a metric or add a particular variable to a statistical model to, say, better account for differences in Japan or for a particular type of content. But we generally don't do that, because what's more important than having this micro-optimization for a narrow audience in Netflix is that we have shared abstractions and common information. And that's what helps us have this highly aligned, loosely coupled culture, and it's what helps us innovate faster, is because we have common sets of information. Okay, and then the last part I touch on is this idea of leadership and ownership, and this idea that it's not just for managers. So I talked to a lot of engineers and data scientists. I thought a lot about my own career, talked to my friends and colleagues about their careers, and I think along the way, a lot of people wonder at some point, what's that going to be like for them? Do they continue individual contributor, hands-on, the keyboard engineering work, or do they transition to management? And just to show up hands, how many people would be transparent enough in the audience to say they're wrestling with that right now? Well, okay, so a lot of people. Now here's my own experience with this, is that for a lot of people, what they're really looking for is more of an outlet for creative control and more of an outlet for impact, an ability to directly connect their efforts and what they're passionate about with impact on the business. That tends to be an initial driver of, I think, why a lot of people go into management. And in thinking about this, it reminds me of this kind of classic quote some of you might have heard from Joe Armstrong, who's the inventor of the Erlang programming language. And at the time, he was describing the pros and cons of object-oriented programming. And there's these benefits of object-oriented programming, but there's some downsides too. And his joking comment was, you wanted the banana, but you ended up getting the gorilla holding the banana. So I feel like that's an analogy that goes with management, especially for people thinking about making that transition, where you want the creative control, you want a little bit more direct connection to impact, and so management feels like this avenue to get that. But management comes with a bunch of other stuff. Some of it you may not want to do. Right? That other stuff is the gorilla holding the banana. So at Netflix, we really try to do some things structurally and organizationally that let people kind of decouple leadership from a title. And regardless of whether you're a manager or an engineer, leadership and ownership is a super huge part of how we evaluate each other and whether we're stunning colleagues. We have a relatively flat org structure, relatively few titles. Netflix is not a place to go if you're looking to move from engineer 1 to engineer 3, or from senior to principal, because we kind of just have one title. We expect everyone to be a very senior engineer. But what we do is we decouple pay from title. And so what it means is we evaluate your personal top of market. Everyone kind of knows their different skill sets, and we don't make people worry about their titling in order to inform their sense of where their leadership role is or what their ability to be compensated is. Those are decoupled because we really need leadership from everybody. And the job of management, people who have chosen to kind of take on that gorilla holding the banana, our job is to really gather and set context and enable experts to be experts and to make great judgment as practitioners. So, just a little bit of a recap. The work we do in Hollywood is pretty fun. It's working at a lot of interfaces, and those interfaces can be messy, can be ambiguous, but they can be a lot of fun. And the data engineering side, the work that happens at Netflix, the scale we work at is amazing. But part of what makes working in this space fun and amazing is also style. It's how we organize ourselves, it's the expectations we set for ourselves, and it's the type of cultural values that we have around things like ownership. And so with that in mind, I hope that adds a little color into some of the work that we do here. Be happy to talk to anyone after this. And if you're interested in more of the tech, apologies for not diving into that more, but my colleague Kurt